We are in Obadiah. I don't know if any of you tried to watch it last week. We recorded it last week. We had 3 here, and no sound was recorded. I was so disappointed. So that's one reason we're doing it tonight, is to get it. We do have many people that watch the broadcast and follow us, and we welcome you. We're glad you're with us. I've had a man lately from Pakistan contact me, wanting to work with me to bring the word to his people. And I said, well, I can't quite go to Pakistan right now. He said, that's not what I'm asking. So we're trying to figure that out. But he said his people need to know the Lord. He's an evangelist. So we are looking at Obadiah as our next minor prophet. And Obadiah is the smallest book in the Old Testament. It's just 1 chapter, 21 verses. So you can read that easily in a sitting. And the title of this study is A Tale of Two Brothers. Obadiah was prophesying to the nation of Edom. Edom was begun by Esau. Esau was one of the sons of Jacob, Isaac. The other one was Jacob. Esau and Jacob were sons of Isaac, and they were in contention from birth. Maybe even in their mother's womb they wrestled around. But we know as they came out that Jacob kept his hand on the heel of Esau and came out with him. And then later in the book of Genesis, about chapter 29, we read that Isaac was dying, and as was the custom then, when the fathers died, he would pass his blessing on, usually to the oldest son, and that son would receive the inheritance of everything the father had. Well, it was getting to be that time, and God had promised to Jacob that he would be the leader of Israel. But like we too often tend to do, and God's people too often tend to do, Jacob and his mother Rebekah decided to take matters into their own hands. And so that's where Esau was a rough outdoors person. We're told he had red hair, very hairy arms, and Jacob was more fair-featured. So Rebekah got hold of an animal skin, put it on Jacob's arms, because Isaac was sick, so when he was blind, So when Jacob went in to see Isaac, Isaac felt his arms and his face and thought that it was his son Esau. And he proceeded to give his blessing to Jacob, thinking it was Esau. Esau comes in after it's all done and cries out to his father, isn't there something you can do for me? And he says, I'm sorry. It all went to Jacob. So as you can imagine, Esau was very upset with Jacob and swore to kill him. Jacob took the threat seriously, and he left the country and went back to Ur of the Chaldees to look for a wife from his mother's family. And so we have that story of how he found his wife through that. He comes back about the time Isaac is dying, and for a brief moment the two brothers reconciled long enough to bury their father. But after that, the enmity arose. Esau was still very upset and angry with Jacob. Esau was the one that started the country of Edom. Edom's on the east side of the Jordan, of the Dead Sea, and it's a very rocky, a very mountainous area, and they were very protected. It's also a very lucrative area, which we'll talk about more as we go along. But little is known of Obadiah. We only know that his name means servant of Jehovah, and a great name it is. There are 3 other people mentioned with the name of Obadiah in the Bible. None of them else wrote a book. They're just minor characters. But that's all we know about Obadiah. We don't know what he did before he was called. We just know that God called on him to give this prophecy to Edom. I've mentioned it's the shortest book of the Old Testament, and that the background is this battle between the two brothers. Obadiah had 3 prophecies in his book to 3 different people. The first one, interestingly enough, was to Edom's neighbors. Edom, again, had made many alliances with the country around. They were not a big nation. They were not a powerful nation. They needed these alliances to be able to withstand battle against the Assyrians, the Babylonians, all of those who were trying to, even the Israelites. And so they made these alliances. What they didn't know is their friends, the ones they made the alliance with, were going behind their back trying to make alliances with countries that were enemies, hostile to Edom, and they were going to betray Edom and come against them and conquer them. So that's the prophecy that Obadiah is doing here. We start out in verse 1 where this is what the sovereign Lord says about Edom. We have heard the message from the Lord. An envoy was sent to the nations to say. So Obadiah is stating his authority there, that his authority comes because God had called him to this task, not because he was some famous priest, prophet, anything like that. He may have been, we just don't know. But his authority came from not his position, but from the call he received of God. It ends, verse 1 continues on with these nations talking. Rise and let us go against her for battle, her being Edom. See, I will make you small among the nations, you will be utterly despised. So these alliances, these countries that supposedly were friends to Edom were seeking to undercut them, to come against them. And so that is a betrayal. And all of us have lived long enough to have felt betrayal at some time, where someone we trusted used our words against us, came against us unknowingly to us in some way. And that betrayal is a very deep cut. It hurts deeply and it's hard to get over. And that's what Edom's neighbors were doing to Edom. One of the things that's important to note here is that this was God-ordained action. And that tells me a couple of things. One, it reminds me that while God is a God that I worship and I bow the knee to him, he is the God of everybody and everything. He stirs hearts that even reject him, kings that deny him, kings that are setting themselves up. God moves them to accomplish his will. He uses them to do his task. And so God is ordaining actually this action by the other people because of Edom's sins. And so while they think they're being smart and crafty, undercutting Edom, finding these other alliances, they're really being in the hand of God in order to bring judgment against Edom. And it teaches us reminds us how God is in control. Everything, all history is his story. He's the one that sets kings into place. He's the one that takes kings down. He rises up nation. He takes them down. And again, whether they call upon his name or not, God is Lord of all, and he rules over all. He is the supreme God. And so this is part of what this tells to me. Again, picking up in 2 and moving on, because this is God talking about how he's bringing this to pass. See, I will make you, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I will make you small. Word there in King James is paltry among the nations. You will be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rocks, who make your home on the heights, you who say to yourself, who can bring me down to the ground? Though you soar like an eagle and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. And that brings us into the second prophecy which is the message to Edom. God is saying judgment is coming. God has been patient as God is always patient. In the New Testament, in the book of Peter, Peter addresses this. The people were thinking they didn't need to change their lifestyle. They didn't need to respond to the message of God. They're saying, hey, it's been thousands of years and nothing has happened that was said. And Peter reminds them that the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, and he is not willing that any should perish, but that all would come to eternal life. And Peter was reminding them that they were the beneficiaries of God's patience. Because if God brought justice, brought judgment, it would all be over for them. Sue and I watched the movie The Shack again last night. Have you seen The Shack? It's a very powerful movie. Yeah, I've read the book. The book's great. And one scene stood out to me there at the end. It's when God takes the form of a man, and the Indian guy's real name is Graham Greene. And he's talking, he's taking the dad, I can't remember who, Mackenzie they call him. He's taking him back to the shack where his daughter was married. And Mackenzie picks it up and says, you're wanting me to forgive the man that killed my daughter. And God said, that's right. And of course Mackenzie said, I can't do that, I can't forgive. He doesn't deserve forgiveness. And Jesus had talked to Mackenzie about being a judge over things and a judge over what God says. And so God says, so you're back to being judge again, saying that he doesn't deserve. And God says, I'm not asking you to condone what he did. I'm not saying that he didn't do anything wrong, but he is still someone that I want redeemed. Even though the man that killed his daughter was a heinous murderer, the movie there brought out how God still wanted to redeem his soul, wanted him, he would have had to confess his sin, realize his sin, call out to God, but God was being patient until the last minute to try to redeem that killer. And so he was asking Mackenzie to give forgiveness to him. Very, very difficult. We would all have trouble doing that. But it just points out to us God's tremendous patience. But the judgment does come. Hebrews, it is appointed unto man once to die, and after that, the judgment. We're all going to stand before God. Revelation chapter 20 talks about how all from the least to the greatest will stand before the throne of God. And to some, Jesus told us, he's going to say, depart from me, for I never knew you. To others, he's going to say, well done, good and faithful servant, now enter into your rest. But that day is coming. And it's easy for us to say we don't have to worry about it because God is so patient, but it is coming. And this time had come now when God is going to judge Edom. Thousands of years had passed, and they had basically turned away from God, weren't following him. And so God says judgment is coming. And then God doesn't do things without a purpose. He doesn't do things unfairly. So he talks about why his judgment is coming. And in the passage we read and what God talks about is he's coming across Edom for their pride. They were very prideful. They were proud of their location. They thought they were safe. They thought they were invincible. They were very wealthy. They were on the crossroads of several trade routes. And that's how they got great wealth. That's how they formed some of these alliances. And so they were taking pride in those alliances rather than trusting God. That was the sin of the alliances, is they were turning to them to protect them. Instead of trusting God, living for God, and letting God take care of them, they lived the way they wanted to and turned to other nations for their protection. And that was an offense to God. They thought they were very wise. Being at the crossroads, they were involved with a lot of cultures. They got exposure to a lot of different ways of thinking, and that gave them knowledge, and they grew in wisdom. But that again is nothing to get proud of and to rest on. And then they did have an army, but God said the army will be defeated. Pick it up at verse 5. If thieves came to you, if robbers in the night, oh, what a disaster awaits you. But would they not steal only as much as they wanted? Robber comes in, they're usually looking for gold pieces or for something they can sell. They don't just come in and rob everything. If grape pickers came to you, would they not leave a few grapes? But how Esau will be ransacked and his hidden treasures pillaged by this invading army. Army's going to come in, wipe them out. All your allies will force you to the border. Your friends will deceive and overpower you. Those who eat your bread will set a trap for you, but you will not detect it. That's that subterfuge, that betrayal. The friends are going to set them up to where they fall. And these are the very ones that sat at the table, ate bread for them. Verse 8, in that day, declares the Lord, will I not destroy the wise men of Edom, men of understanding in the mountains of Esau? Your warriors, O Timon, will be terrified, and everyone in Esau's mountains will be cut down in the slaughter. Because of the violence against your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame. You will be destroyed forever. And so that leads us into why God was judging the nation of Edom. They had continued this hatred against the Israelites. Obadiah talks about an occasion where the Babylonian army was coming in to overcome Edom. And he says that the Edomites looked on in glee. They took pleasure in their brothers being carried off, being defeated, carried off in the battle. And there's a verse in Psalms that talks about how the people of Edom kept the Israelites within the city of Jerusalem, again, so they could not escape the horde that's coming. So they didn't just sit back and do nothing. They actively aided and abetted the enemy of Israel, and that's what God is condemning them for. God had told the Israelites, even though there was enmity between them and Edom, that they were to love their brothers and treat them as brothers. They were part of that same lineage, and the Edomites were to do the same thing. But they rejoiced at their brothers' troubles. They aided and abetted their brothers' enemies, and they ignored God's warning. This wasn't the first time God had talked to them. God told them judgment was coming, but they ignored his warning, didn't believe he'd do anything, and so God allowed the nation to come in and overrun them. And so that was his prophecy to Edom. He prophesied to the enemies of Edom that they would not stand because of their subterfuge, for by and large one reason. He prophesied to Edom of why Edom was coming under judgment. And in the word it says, in that day, or in the day of the Lord. That is a recurring theme through the Bible. One of the times we talk about the day of the Lord is in the final judgment, not the rapture. In the rapture, Jesus comes in the air, catches us up to meet him, then all go to heaven for 1,000 years. And then after that 1,000 years is when Jesus comes as a triumphant king, sets his feet on earth, and reestablishes his kingdom. That's the, capital The, day of the Lord. But there were other times throughout the Bible, this is one of them, where there were the day of the Lord. And it's remarking to when God does something specific and unique. So that's what's going on in verse 8. Go down to verse 10. We read through 9. Verse 10. Because of the violence against your brother Jacob, that's the point we covered, you will be covered with shame. You will be destroyed forever. God took that seriously, that they came against family. 11. On the day you stood aloof while strangers carried off your brother's wealth and foreigners entered your brother's gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. You should not look down on your brother in the day of his misfortune, nor rejoice over the people of Judah in their day of destruction, nor boast so much in their day of trouble. You should not march through the gates of my people in the day of their disaster, nor look down on them in their calamity in the day of their disaster, nor seize their wealth in the day of their disaster. You should not wait at the crossroads to cut down their fugitives. That's talking about the ones trying to escape, nor hand over their survivors in the day of their Lord. The day of the Lord is near for all nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head. Just as you drank on my holy hill, so all the nations will drink continually. They will drink and be as if they had never been. But on the Mount Zion will be deliverance. That gets into our next study. So God really is angry with Edom for having taken this attitude against Jacob, being so overt in it as to be at the city gates to take advantage of their trouble, to steal their wealth, to actually keep them from escaping so that they could be hunted down by the army, taken prisoner, or killed. I mean, that is low. We would all say the same thing if we had a family member that turned us over to drug runners in our county that took advantage of our trouble by stealing our land once the drug runners took it. We would consider that high betrayal, and it is, and it was, and God wasn't going to stand for it. So the last message is to the Jewish people, and it's a message of hope. God and his great condemnations against man, again with his judgments, always reminds them of hope, and that's where we stopped off in verse 17. Let's read. But on Mount Zion will be deliverance, it will be holy, and the house of Jacob will possess its inheritance. The house of Jacob will be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. The house of Esau will be stubble, and they will set it on fire and consume it. There will be no survivors from the house of Esau. The Lord has spoken. People from the Negev, that's the southern part of Saudi Arabia, will occupy the mountains of Esau, and people from the foothills will possess the land of the Philistines. They will occupy the fields of Ephraim and Samaria, and Benjamin will possess Gilead. This company of Israelite exiles who are in Canaan will possess the land as far as Zarephath. The exiles from Jerusalem who are in Sepharad will possess the towns of the Negev. Deliverers will go up on Mount Zion to cover the mountains of Esau, and the kingdom will be the Lord. So God is sharing with them there is coming a time of restoration. God's wrath had come upon his Jewish believers, his Jewish followers, the nation of Judah, his people, and he had cast them into judgment. He had let them be overrun. But whereas he says of Esau, of Edom, it's going to be no more. It won't exist anymore. He tells Jacob, or the Israelites, that they will be restored to their land. They will take up these homes that the enemy have taken, that they will go up to Mount Zion and worship the Lord once again in God's kingdom. So God here is pointing to those end times. That's when that's going to happen. Many of us believe it's happening now with the return of the Israelites in 1948, their continuation of being there. That's what all the battles are for. It's still battling against the nation Israel, but they are in the land, they are returning, and God is bringing them back, and one day we're going to see the restoration. God is bringing them back, not having turned a blind eye to their willful sin or rejection of Him, but in an attempt to redeem them again. Just like that account from the movie I told you. Even though God's people had rejected Him, turned from Him, worshiped Baal, done all of these kind of evil things in the sight of the Lord, God still loves them, wants them to be a part of His kingdom, and so He is going to give them another opportunity. We have in the prophetic teachings that 2 prophets will come at the end times and preach to the Israelites, trying to get them to accept Jesus as the Messiah. One final call, one final time, and then the Lord will bring that judgment against all mankind. And that's what this is saying in 19, that everybody is going to be come under God's judgment and correction. All these nations that aren't God followers, that don't worship Him, they're going to be judged for their actions. God holds all persons accountable for their sin. To those who understand that, believe it, and accept His Son as their payment for this sin, they will go to be with God forever. They will be His people. But they too must make that decision. No one is exempt for it. And so that's the book of Obadiah. 3 messages to those in alliance with Edom for their betrayal, to Edom for their hatred primarily against their brother and ignoring God, and then finally to the Israelites a word of hope and blessing. And that is a blessing that we can all receive, that we can know that as we turn back to God, He will receive us, welcome us with open arms. And we tend to think in grand terms of some great sin that some have done and turning around. But the same is true for those little hidden sins that other people don't see, that we know are between us and God, times that we didn't obey Him, or times we betrayed Him, and maybe no one else knows about it, but God knows. And that day is coming. And it's just as true that when we hear His voice saying, Wes, you shouldn't have done that, and we confess and acknowledge it, He restores us just as He's going to restore the nation of Israel. God is the great healer, is the restorer, is the reclaimer, but it's based upon our believing the good news and coming to Him. And that's why it's important that each and every day, each and every moment, we walk in a sensitivity with God to hear Him, to sense where He's leading us to go. It's not all correction or punishment. God is wanting us to surrender all that so He can lead us into those great areas, lead us into that great work, that great blessing. That's what He's wanting to do. And so He wants us to yield with Him with wisdom and to do that. When I was a young boy, maybe because I was the 4th born, saw my siblings get punished, I literally would try to think, one of the things I can think about is when I wanted to go play with a friend. I would think, I want to go play with Stevie Godwin. Okay, I go to Mom, I ask, what's she going to say before she'll let me go? Did you make your bed? Did you put your clothes away? Did you, whatever it was she wanted me to do? And so I would try to do what I knew she was going to say, have you done this? So that when I asked for permission, she basically couldn't say no. Did you do your homework? Yes, Mom. Did you clean your room? Yes, Mom. She'd run out of things. Okay, go on. And that worked a few times. I wasn't always perfect. But we can do that with God. God, what is it you want me to do? Let me hear, let me respond before you have to get my attention in ways that I don't want my attention got. And we know through his scripture that he's wanting to tell us that. He says, if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask. Call unto me and I will answer thee. Show you great and mighty things that thou knowest not. Over and over again, God says, call on me, call on me, call on me. Be smart up front, be wise, turn to God first. And so that's where we all are before his seat. It doesn't matter what our level of sin is that we have set. We all stand before him saying, Lord, what would you have me do? What would you have me change? And surrendering to him. So that's what Obadiah is talking to the people about. He's saying judgment has come because the time had come. God's patience had run out with Edom, with Edom's alliances, but his patience isn't quite done with his people, and he's going to give them one more chance. Any comments you have before we close in prayer? Little book with a big message.
Yes. Well, that just continues throughout the Bible.
Oh yeah. It's amazing God's consistency. He says a lot of different ways, but it's the same way. Follow me, follow me, follow me.